Hey everyone, it's been a while. I wanted to chime in on the Daniel Penny case. I think I can add some unique value to this. We're going to talk about chokeholds today. Okay, so here's my presentation. Let's talk about chokes. Now, to be clear, I am not commenting on the character of either Daniel Penny or Jordan Neely. I'm not really commenting on guilt or innocence, and I'm not commenting on the many other details of this case. This is going to be a very focused conversation on chokeholds. I've got some experience in this realm. My big goal here is to improve your knowledge of chokes and show that this particular situation is complex. And in my opinion, there is a lot we simply cannot know for sure. Let's talk briefly about expertise. I think this comes from two distinct categories. Number one, experience. So as it pertains to chokeholds, experience means you've felt it. You've done it to others and you've had it done to you, hopefully in a gym, in a martial arts class. Okay, that's the proper setting. Experience also means time on the mat. So I'm going to talk to you about a martial art called Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, where chokeholds are extremely prevalent. And Brazilian Jiu Jitsu practitioners train on the mat. So your mat time is really important. And also hours analyzing jiu-jitsu competition videos and mixed martial arts contests, and even street fights and altercations on YouTube. Experience is something that cannot be shared on YouTube. However, knowledge can, and that's the second category of expertise in this area. So we're going to talk a little bit about anatomy and a lot about position, mechanics, and pressure as it relates to chokeholds. And of course, I'm going to share my observations on the Daniel Penny, Jordan Neely altercation. I want to talk a little bit about my expertise. I've been training Brazilian Jiu Jitsu for more than 13 years. The picture in the upper left is the proof of that. That's me training with my friend VC. Yes, he's my friend, even though I've got him locked in an armbar. And we're training on the mats. And so that's what I mean about mat time. I haven't just studied it and practiced it myself. I have taught it to hundreds of people. I had a middle school team. I used to teach it to high school senior girls before they went off to college. And I've taught it to plenty of adult students, male and female. Since the true crime audience tends to skew female, I included a picture of one of my students, Abby, beating a boy at a tournament. I thought you'd get a kick out of that. And the final picture is me receiving my second stripe on my blue belt with Royce Gracie. So if you're not familiar with Royce, it's spelled Royce, like Rolls Royce, but it's pronounced Royce Gracie. Now, the Gracies are essentially the first family of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. They're the ones that created the art, brought it over to America. Royce is world famous, and he was the 170-pound Brazilian who, in the first 4 UFC Ultimate Fighting Championships, he was beating everybody of all sizes, any martial art. He would grab onto them, drag them to the ground, and a lot of times choke them out, make them tap. So if you're not familiar with Royce, look him up. I also wanted to show you one of my belts and a little bit of the wear and tear on the belt. And I also brought along some of my competition medals to show you. That's some of my expertise and some of my credentials. What most people see when they look at a chokehold, let's say they're watching an altercation on YouTube, they see the altercation between two people, they see an arm around the neck, and that's all they need to point and say, he's choking him. And I'm here today to say that that is not necessarily true. There's a lot more to it than that. I want us as a true crime community to do better with this particular issue meaning, when we see a chokehold position, I want us to look at it in more detail. I'm not saying that we should just dismiss all of these situations and not treat chokehold positions really seriously, because we should. But I want to share some expertise and hopefully level up the knowledge here, so that when you're analyzing it and you're reacting to it, you have more information than you did before. That's like essentially my goal. And I want you to be able to do a deeper analysis than just surface level, seeing something in a video, reacting to it emotionally, and just assuming that, when someone has their arm around another person's neck, it's deadly force. It does not necessarily mean that, although, yes, of course it can be. Generally in jiu-jitsu, we talk about two different types of chokes. So there's a wind choke, and that generally means that you are squeezing or pulling back on the front of the neck. Really dangerous. You can do structural damage to the person's, throat, windpipe, trachea, what have you. The second type is a blood choke. So that would be where you're squeezing the sides of the neck. And that is most relevant in this case. We're going to talk about that in a lot more detail. Let's talk about how a blood choke works. So the neck essentially has two main arteries reaching up into the brain, and they're delivering oxygenated blood to the brain. Now, what a blood chokehold will do is basically it sits the person's neck into this V shape. So you can see down here in the picture, the man in the back has his elbow aligned with the person in the front, their chin, okay? And the back side of the person's arm is one side of the V, and then their forearm will be the other side of the V. So basically you've got a, should do it like this, a V like this. The neck's gonna sit right in the point of the V. And then when you choke, you're essentially closing this space on the sides. And what that's going to do is basically, if you picture these arteries like hoses, it's going to pinch the hoses, and it's going to slow and maybe stop oxygenated blood flow to the brain. If you do that for long enough, about 12 seconds or so, then the person will go unconscious. That's when you let go. If you do hold on to it, of course, you'll deprive the brain of oxygen, and that can be serious. That can cause brain damage or death. So we want to be really careful with this kind of thing. But that's the basic mechanics of how it works. Now let's talk about some other elements that are going to help us in our analysis, because it's a lot more than just wrapping your arm around someone's neck and squeezing. The first element is going to be here on the left, and it's going to be position, and more specifically body alignment. This is going to come up in our analysis later. So you can see the man in the back is perfectly aligned with his opponent who's in front of him, and their shoulders mirror each other. They're perfectly aligned and matched. If you look down at their hips are also perfectly aligned. Left hip to left hip, right hip to right hip. Okay? And their spines are almost, parallel lines if you could picture them. All right? There's not one guy way off to the side or one guy turned with his shoulder against his chest or anything like that. The man in the front, his back is against the other man's chest, and their bodies are perfectly aligned. It's actually, position is actually really important because it makes the choke more effective and therefore potentially more deadly. If they're out of position, it's way harder for the choke to be effective and or dangerous. Okay. So he's doing a couple of other things. With their bodies aligned, he is securing his upper half with what's called a seatbelt grip. And you can see it looks a lot like a seatbelt. And then he's securing his lower body with what we call hooks. So he's putting his legs on the inner thighs of the person in front of him. And it's really hard to get someone off of you like this. They're, clung to you like a backpack. And that's the idea. Now, this position sets you up to get the lock for the choke. So let's talk about that a little bit. You make that V shape with the choking arm, okay? And like I said, the tip of the V typically will align with the person's chin in front, okay? Now let's look at the choking arm. Okay, so he's got the thick side of his arm on one hose of the neck, and then he's got his forearm on the other hose. So if he closes that V up, like I showed before, it's going to pinch the two hoses. But he has to be mechanically sound to be able to do this efficiently and correctly. So look at the choking arm, okay, and follow it up to the hand. The hand is resting on his other arm's bicep, and the fingers reach all the way, like halfway up the arm. Okay, and you can't see any of his wrist or anything like that. So this hand is actually pretty deep. Let's look at the other arm. This would be considered the support arm. Okay, and this is going to kind of make this a lock. He's going to lock in the choke. So this arm comes behind the person's head, and you're going to touch the back of their head with the back of your hand if you're doing it the right way. And look, he's even holding his other shoulder. Okay, that's going to be a proper choking position. You can finish the choke, you can squeeze the hoses pretty easily from this position because your mechanics are so good and your technique is so good. You don't have to use a lot of muscle, and it only takes a small adjustment to get that pinch on the hoses. Okay, the further away you are from this position, the trickier it gets. Now, the final element you need, if you have position and you've got a proper mechanically sound chokehold, then you're going to implement your squeeze. Okay, you've got to squeeze the hoses. Okay, and that's going to be the third bit. Now, this isn't always true, but when someone is squeezing, you'll see tension in both faces or one or the other. You'll see tension in one body or the other. It can be clear, but sometimes it actually isn't. Sometimes no one makes a face. People are pretty stoic sometimes. And it kind of depends on their state of mind, too, whether they're going to react to the choke. A lot of times you'll see instinctively the hands come up to defend, okay, and pull down on the choking arm. Obviously, that's quite common. But again, it doesn't always happen. I think my goal today, though, is just to show you like what the proper mechanics are, talk to you about what's typical, and show that like there's a lot here that we just can't know for sure. That's my problem when I see people speaking so confidently about this topic, because it's really complex and it's a game of inches, which I'll show you later on. So those are the three elements. Don't forget those elements: position, mechanics, technique, and the squeeze. Basically what I'm going to be assessing is, what kind of danger Neely is in at any given time. And do I think that he is in danger? Does it look like maybe he isn't? Or is it at least debatable? 'Cause I think that's important, right? Because that allows for reasonable doubt to come in. So let's take a look at some footage. Let's watch Neely. He's going to tap the man's leg who is directly in front of him. There he goes. Okay, and right there, just the way he was tapping the guy, to me, he doesn't seem overly urgent, like he's getting choked and he desperately needs help. It's just my opinion, but that's what I saw. But more than that, he's talking to the guy, okay? And if you're getting choked, you're not talking, okay? In fact, a lot of people will be unable to. Their face will be starting to swell from the pressure, and some people even make gurgling sounds. But you're definitely not able to talk if it's a tight choke. So at this point in time, I don't feel like he is in a tight choke. I actually lean a bit more toward this being a restraint position. So you can see there more conversation. Now, what's also interesting is that Penny is in conversation as well. And you'll also see him moving his head around. And sometimes he even moves it back and to the right or something like that. That's also quite uncommon if someone is squeezing. Actually, when you squeeze, your body mechanics tend to go inward like this. So your head would come down, okay, as your arms squeeze, and maybe as you flex your abs as well. So again, another sign to me that this is probably more of a restraint position and not a tight choke that's being squeezed. So I want to talk a little bit about the guy on the left. Right here, he assumes control of both of Neely's arms. And this is a little tricky because, we're trying to assess whether Neely is in imminent danger here. And like I said, one of the instincts is to reach up and pull the choking arm down. Well, he's not really able to do that right now because the guy has control of his arms. So that kind of takes away that signal from our analysis. Again, Penny talking, not really showing many signs of, squeezing to me. And one thing I want to point out too, let's take a look at Penny's bag right here. So in my view, what this bag is doing is it's not allowing Penny's back to be flat on the subway floor. That may be where the two of them would have ended up. I imagine they were in a standing position and Penny came up from behind him and then dragged him to the ground. Well, when they hit the ground, I think Penny's bag kind of shifted him onto his right shoulder a little bit, whereas Neely stayed more flat. Okay, and I can kind of see that here. You can sort of see Neely's left shoulder is sort of like turned in a little bit and maybe touching Penny's chest. You're going to see this better when they turn toward us, but I actually think their bodies are out of alignment. And like I said earlier, if alignment or the lock itself are out of position, it's less effective and therefore, likely less dangerous. Because, in my estimation, Penny does not have the ideal position here for a choke. In fact, I think the meat of his left arm, the bicep, is not really flush with this left side hose of Neely's neck. I think it's actually higher and it's turned a little bit. It's more on like his jaw and the side of his face. And I think his left side hose, Neely's, does have some room to stay open and let blood flow. Okay, we'll see this better when we look at the other side, but I just kind of wanted to point that out early. You can see their bodies are turned and they're just not quite aligned. Okay, now there's a scuffle that begins, and I think Neely is mostly fighting with the guy who's holding his arms, not Penny. Now, right there, Penny came up, okay, and I think Neely was at least part of that driving force, and then they went backward. It's really hard to tell if Penny pulled him back. If he did, that might put pressure on his neck, but also probably under the chin as well. So not sure that there's a blood choke going on there either. But also Neely could have been the one that drove them both back, or it could have been both of them. Okay, this is another case where you're just not sure. I don't think anyone could say definitively, okay, what happened there. But this, now that they've turned, this is going to give us some good analysis on their misalignment. And I'm going to start talking about Penny's hands because I think they're way out of position. I don't think he has an effective grip, which again means, like for me, effective means how dangerous it is. I think it's loose and ineffective, and therefore Neely has some blood flow happening. He's got some breathing room, and this is more of a restraint position than a really tight choke. So let's look at that exchange one more time. It comes up, they go back. Now you can see Penny's face is showing some effort here, so that could equate to a squeeze. It's really hard to tell. It looks like there's quite a bit of space here, but there could be a lot of contact on the neck. Can't really be sure. One thing I do want to point out though, let's get this arrow back. Okay, take a look at this hand here. If you remember, one arm is the choking arm, okay? And for Penny, that's going to be this arm right here. There's the V. And then we've got the support hand. And as you remember, the support hand is supposed to be all the way over here, touching the shoulder. Okay, there's none of that connection happening. Okay, so he's way disconnected. And also his wrist is bent over like this. His hand isn't flat. It's not behind the head. Actually, Neely's head is contacting Penny's chest. So Penny cannot get that support hand behind the head. And that actually tightens the choke quite a bit. Therefore, if it's not there, it loosens the choke quite a bit. Okay? And we're going to look at this wrist more later as well. But I can see that wrist. I can see it bending. And what that tells me is he is barely holding on. The choke arm is barely holding on to the bicep. I mean, he's just got his fingertips on there and his wrist is hanging out. I don't know if you can see that, but I think his wrist is hanging out. I think he's just got a fingertip grip there. It's not strong at all. Okay, the strong grip would be over the bicep here. Supporting arm comes in and touches the shoulder, and it's almost like you're hugging yourself and you've got this locked up. I do not see Daniel Penny doing that hug grip, that tight lock, which would mean a tight choke, which would mean a more dangerous choke. I see really bad technique. I see loose grips. I see broken connections. And I think all of that equates to a looser grip and more room for Neely to be safe. Here's one more thing I want to say about the strained face that Penny is making, because this looks a lot like someone is just ripping on a choke on somebody. I think we're guilty in this moment of forgetting about the lower body. Daniel Penny does have his legs wrapped around Neely. He's got his hooks in, which you'll see in another shot much better. And he could have felt like he was losing connection with Neely's body down there, and he could have been squeezing his legs. For me, again, there's no way to tell whether, why he's making this face. Could be either or, it could be both. There's no real way to tell. But I just wanted to bring that up because it's really easy to forget that he's trying to control pretty much a whole body. And we're just paying attention to the choke so much because it's such a striking visual. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's where the most intense battle is going on. In fact, Neely, I think, is having a more intense battle with the guy who's on his arms. Okay, so I want to stop it here and make a number of comments, actually. Okay, let's talk about position first. Okay, let's figure out where. Okay, that couldn't have been drawn worse. Let's figure out where Neely's left shoulder is. It's about right there, and I think it is dug into Penny's lower pec or upper rib area. I do not see their shoulders aligned. Okay, and look at Neely's other shoulder. It's way up here. Okay, these two gentlemen are not back to back. If they were back to back, I do feel like the choke would be perfectly aligned and potentially dangerous. But what I'm seeing here is quite a bit of misalignment. And what that does is it puts Neely's ear on Penny's kind of like left chest. And if his ear is there, then that means the side of his face is against Penny's, bicep. And his kind of side lower jaw is against Penny's lower bicep, right? Not that hose on his neck. I don't think this choke is sunk in. I think he's way out of position. I do think that this forearm is against Neely's neck. So I do think his right side could be restricted, at least somewhat. Okay. But this side, this left side, I really don't see that. Let me get rid of all these marks so we can look at it again. But I am just not seeing that. I don't see, if Penny squeezed right now, I think Neely would have a pinch on his right side. But over here, I feel like it would be his jawline, side of his face, maybe a little bit of the neck, but honestly, I'm just not seeing it. And we've got everything else too. We've got way out of position hand here, not strong, not behind the head. All right, way disconnected with this shoulder over here, which would make it far tighter. Therefore, I think this is loose. It's like a loose belt. And I see his wrist right here. I see Penny's wrist right here, which means his fingertips are just holding on to the lower bicep. His hand isn't up and really locked in and secured on a firm grip here. Just picture like maybe rock climbing where you've got a full hand instead of like just the top knuckles hanging on a rock. All right. So this to me is a weak grip. The bodies are out of alignment. The belt is loose. If he squeezed, it's going to put pressure on bone and the side of his face, not the hose in the neck. This is just my opinion, but this is what I'm seeing. I wanted to show you a video where another jiu-jitsu practitioner kind of talks about this whole alignment thing and what it does to the effectiveness of the choke when you do end up squeezing it. So take a listen.
Now, one of the big problems is if Anya starts getting away from me, then that's going to create a problem because if I'm off center, then I'm just squeezing her neck, and if she's got a strong jaw and strong neck, she's not going to tap to that. It's not going to make her fall asleep.
Okay, so that was really important what he said. If the bodies get out of alignment, then the opponent starts to get away from you. And if you squeeze, yes, it's going to maybe put some pressure on the neck, but also the jaw. And it's doubtful that it's going to put the person to sleep. Okay, and let's watch more of the video. And I've got it in slow motion now because at one point it really speeds up. And it's too bad because there's probably some good information that we could observe there. But this is the video I have. Now, one thing I want you to watch for is Jordan Neely grimacing in pain. And you might watch this video and think that it is because of what Daniel Penny is doing. But actually, I'm going to offer that it is the guy on the left, the guy who has been fighting the hands. What he does is one arm of Neely's is out straight. It's his left arm. And this guy on the left here is going to come in and he's going to put a knee on that arm with his full body weight. That's what Neely is grimacing over, in my opinion. Here comes the knee. There's one grimace and there's the other grimace. Okay, that happened really quick, but that's what I see happening. This guy on the left actually wanted to do a 2-on-1 control on Neely's right arm, his top arm. So he needed to control Neely's left arm with something else. And he came down with a knee. All right. And I think that's what Neely was grimacing over in that moment there. Let's watch again. There he goes. And it's causing a lot of pain, right? Because that upper shin bone near the knee is, whew, I mean, that's really painful. So I think that's what's going on. And what this guy on the left does is he actually locks up Neely in something called a Kimura grip. That is another jiu-jitsu move. I don't know if this guy trained. Either he trained or he's seen enough to have thought of this grip in this moment. But when the camera kind of turns, I'm going to show you what grip he's got Neely in. Let's get that done. And then I need to go back and show you something that happens with one of Penny's hands that shows how loose his choke was. Okay, so right there, the guy on the left, he's on the right now though. He went into a 2-on-1 grip, and it's called a Kimura grip. He just went into it right there. You probably missed it, but let's keep going. And I'm going to show you the fully established grip, and then we'll look at an example. Yep, there it is right there. He's got the Kimura. Okay, right there. I hope you can see it. But basically, he's got one hand holding Neely's wrist. And what he's done is he's laced the other arm through the space between Neely's body and his arm. And he's grabbed his own wrist. That's called a Kimura grip. Okay, let me go back to my presentation here and show you a picture of this. Okay, I hope you can see that. But that's what a Kimura grip looks like. Okay, you hold the person's wrist. See, the guy in the blue gi, he's holding the white gi's wrist. And then his other arm comes through the hole and you grab your own wrist. This is a very controlling grip. You can break, you can pop someone's shoulder out with it if you torque it, or you can just use it as a control. Okay, and that's what we see going on right here. That's why I think this guy knows something. Maybe he just did it instinctively, but that's a pretty advanced grip. But there's a lot of control to that. Now let's go back and watch something else. There's a moment where Penny's top hand actually slips over Neely's head, and you'll see his hat kind of fall down. And it just kind of shows how flimsy this choke grip really is. You do need that support hand. You can choke someone with one arm, but it takes superb technique or a lot of muscle. And when you use muscle, it doesn't last long. You're going to burn out really quickly. And Penny was in this position for quite a while, which again, it kind of shows that at least for a lot of this time period, Neely really was in a restraint position. Now, there are some other things that can come into play, like if you've kind of got a light choke on somebody for a long period of time, that can cause issues as well. So that could be in play here. And there's another thing to consider too, and that is the person who's being choked. What's their sensitivity? I actually once had a student who was extremely sensitive to chokes like this. So we had to actually tell the other students, like, you can't do that move on him. So different people have different sensitivities to this. I would say that's really uncommon. I have never seen that since, and I only saw it that one time. But still, it's something that could be relevant. Let's watch Penny's hand slip over the top here. There it goes. So you can kind of see Neely's hat falling down. And this actually gives us a good angle on how bent Penny's inside wrist is. I mean, I can really see the hand bending back there. Again, I think it's a really weak finger grip. This hand on the top is almost to Neely's forehead, which is, completely ineffective. It's not supporting any kind of choking mechanics or anything like that. So I think he's probably still okay here. And like I said, I think the left side of his face and jaw are primarily touching the surface area of Penny's left arm. So I don't think there's a super effective hose pinch happening on that side. This looks way more violent than it is because it's in super fast forward. I've actually got it slowed down to 25 and it's still moving like this. So we've definitely got some more tension here. Okay, I definitely see some tension here. Like I said at the beginning, I'm not arguing for or against this. I mean, he could very well be choking him in a dangerous way. I just think there's a lot of portions of this video where nobody can say conclusively. And I would say, arguably in a lot of the portions, I feel like he's probably just in a restraint and not a choke. In this moment, though, it's tough to say. Penny looks pretty tense. He's definitely got the forearm against one side of the neck, and they're kind of in a position where I'm not able to observe it completely well. I still think Neely's left shoulder is dug into the body of Penny here. So I don't think it's a super effective choke unless Penny used a ton of muscle, because the mechanics and the technique are so poor. He would have to use muscle to make up for that and make up for all the gaps that are being caused from the poor grips and poor position. Now, as you can see here, Penny has one hook over the top, okay, anchoring his lower body to Neely's. And then he actually does have the other one through the bottom. You can see the shoe right here. It's just like much harder to see, but he does have both hooks in. Camera's going to turn. And we've got the Kimura grip from this guy, and we've got Penny's both hooks in. And from this point on, I can't see anything. And they've turned, actually their bodies look more aligned here. So I would say things probably got a little bit more dangerous right here. But I can't see faces. I can't see angles, positions, mechanics, signs of squeezing. I can't see any of that. So I'm not really able to offer any opinion either way. Now, for those of you thinking about a comment I made earlier, which is, you can kind of have a light choke in for a long period of time, and that can do some damage as well, put people out or whatever their body is susceptible to. I do want to show that it is possible, though, to have someone in a choking position for quite a long time and have it not be damaging. So I started this video at 11 minutes, and I'm going to kind of let it play for a while. Even though the guy demonstrating, lets go at certain points or whatever, he's got a pretty tight grip around this guy for about a minute and a half straight. And the other guy is doing just fine. Now, it's not an altercation. He doesn't have adrenaline pumping and all that stuff, but I would say that grip right there is tighter than most of what we just saw Daniel Penny had on Jordan Neely. And this guy's, doing just fine as this demonstration is going. Still got that grip. Puts it right back in. Now that mechanically is much better. Well, I shouldn't say better, but it's, it's more mechanically sound, I guess, than anything Penny had. You can see there's no broken wrists. There's no huge mile-long separation between hands and shoulders. There's no holding on for dear life with fingertips here. This is much, much tighter. He's just hanging on to it, and the other guy's doing fine. If you imagine two guys in an altercation video on YouTube and you saw this, hopefully if you were someone who would have looked at that and immediately just assumed, oh yeah, that's deadly force right off the bat, I'm hoping now you'll look into it a little more deeply and maybe say, not necessarily, if you see some things that are out of place. Okay, still going, still holding. Now, what's crazy here, and it's really worth taking a little pit stop to talk about this together. Watch the difference between not choking and choking. Okay, what you want to look for is this guy here tapping. So he's going to tap the man in the back. He's going to tap his arms and tell him, that's it. I quit. You got to let go. But look at how small the adjustment is between totally fine and what we could call in the true crime realm deadly force. Okay, doing fine, doing fine. Watch how little he moves. Just that. See, there he goes and taps. Okay, let me show it to you one more time. Watch how slight the movement is between fine and potentially deadly. That's it. He moved about 2 inches. So that's why you can't just look at something and say, I know what that is. It's deadly or it's not deadly, whatever. 2 inches this way and it's super dangerous. But, The inverse of that is 2 inches the other way, and the guy's totally fine. All right, so that's how close we are to being right or wrong. And that's why I hope I'm not coming off as making a definitive statement on anything. I'm just looking at the position. I'm using my experience and my knowledge. I'm analyzing what I'm seeing with Daniel Penny and Jordan Neely. And, my determination is most of the time, I think it really was just a restraint position. But there are definitely moments where it's unclear. I'm not sure. It could absolutely be a squeeze. It could be dangerous, whatever. And then there's that whole bit where we can't really see anything. Let's go back to the video and watch just one more portion. Yeah, unfortunately, this is where Neely stops moving. Go back to normal speed. Okay, now watch what the guy on the right does. Okay, see how he went to his foot? I don't mean to be disrespectful showing this, but you see how he went to his foot and picked it up? Watch Penny here. He's going to go for the other foot. Okay, you could just see him leaning over to get the other foot. Now, why did they do that? That's another reason why I think the guy who was controlling the hands and got the Kimura grip, he knows something about jiu-jitsu, because that's a really common thing we do in jiu-jitsu when someone gets choked out. It doesn't happen a whole lot, by the way. I don't want to give jiu-jitsu a bad name. It's perfectly safe and you should totally train it. But this is really common. I actually found a video where a guy's explaining it. Listen to this.
So what they'll do is we lay them down on their back like this, nice and relaxed, okay? And then I basically lift his legs and I hold his legs up.
Okay, there you go. That's really common in jiu-jitsu. It's probably bro science. I don't know if it's effective or not, but it's just what people do. Let's talk about a couple of unknowns, all right, that make things so uncertain. The pressure intensity at any given moment, we're just not clear on it. The consistency of pressure. So if you're holding it for a long time, again, really hard to tell. You saw the difference between a position that was totally fine versus one that was not. It can just be 2 inches. So again, it's how do you know that? How do you tell exactly how much pressure was being exerted, how much danger Neely was actually in from Daniel Penny's lock that he had on him? I don't think you can tell definitively, at least not from this video. That's where I would look to the other analysis in the trial, like medical examiners and things like that. And Neely's own pressure sensitivity. Maybe he had that naturally. Maybe it was because of some other ailment or condition he had. Again, really hard to tell, and I certainly don't know. And then there's a bunch of out of sight elements that make this whole thing really unclear. Some additions I wanted to make, muscle versus technique. So exerting force with muscle is very tiring. It can't last long. Technique exerts force with things like body weight, structure, and mechanics, which means it requires far less muscular effort to apply a choke. In other words, if your technique is bad, you have to use muscle, and muscle does not last long. So that's another reason why, they were in this position for quite a long time. And I don't think Penny was squeezing that whole time. I just don't. I think his technique was really bad. I think he would have had to use muscle to exert a deadly force. And I just don't think that was happening, at least not in the moments I can observe and analyze. Another thing that kind of bothers me is the way the media keeps calling him like a trained Marine. I just want to get something straight here. Marines are trained in very basic Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've trained with a lot of them. I've trained with Marines and cops and special forces and average Joes and Janes. And, Marines are naturally like, they come in and they're big and strong and they're game to spar and everything. But, the technique that they get in the military, I think is really, it's kind of rudimentary. It's not to insult them. They have to train in like 100 other things. But they're not like specialists. And I can see that in Penny's technique. So to call him like a trained Marine, I see what they're trying to do. And it just puts out this implication like he's this like perfect weapon killer, kind of person. And I just disagree. I can see his technique and it's low level. And I don't think it's very effective because of that. I see disconnection. I see bad technique. I see bad positioning. And therefore I see ineffectiveness. And therefore I think his, the force that he was exerting is far less deadly. A lot of people have commented on what the instructor said. And yeah, I think that's really powerful testimony. I do want to make a few comments though. That instructor has to be really careful with a situation like this. So I'm not surprised by the distancing. He's got to think about his own reputation and the reputation of maybe whatever academy he's running. And of course, he's going to avoid any hint of an endorsement of deadly force. So he's going to be really careful with his words. In my estimation, my opinion. And honestly, it was pretty bad technique. So I'm not too surprised that he would say like, that's not what I taught him. Let's say, I think he just has to assume that Daniel Penny might have been responsible here. So he's got to be really careful and say like, I did not teach people to, put a citizen in a chokehold and hold it for that length of time. We're going to see more chokeholds. And my hope is that we're going to see them now with different eyes. Okay. And we could do a more advanced analysis now rather than just seeing and then assuming that we know exactly what's going on. Here's one here that I wanted to share. This was on an LAX, a flight bound for LAX.
I got up to restrain him.
We don't see the moment the man is restrained, but a photo shows him afterward. You can see him with his hands behind his back, restrained to the seat by seatbelts. Glofro explained to us how he was able to stop the man's violent outburst.
From the back with a choke. After I restrained him, 2 other bystanders that were on the flight had already gotten zip ties from the flight attendant.
He got him in a chokehold and 2 other bystanders came and helped. I mean, it's really close to this, situation here with Penny. If there were video of that chokehold, I think it could be a much different scenario for this guy. There's no video, so I think this one's kind of like a clean break for him. But if there was video, I think a lot of people might have laid their eyes on that and would have automatically assumed just by seeing it and getting worked up and emotional over the sight of the position and said that's incredibly dangerous or it's one thing or another thing. And that's my purpose for the video. I want us to be able to analyze it more critically than that.
Entire St. John's County Sheriff's Department, you're all amazing. Justice today was served, and this is a message to young men or just men in general. Look out, look around you, and if you see someone that needs help, you do it.
So these words were from the Madison Schemitz trial. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. This was basically the hero that saved her and her mother from the stabbing. And, his message to people was don't just sit back and film with your phone, get involved, intervene, be a hero. And I think that message is great, but, this is kind of why I'm doing this video. There's going to be more scenarios where people get involved. And we, as the general public, need to be more educated observers when a situation like this is filmed. We comment and we discuss and we shape the narrative in large part as a true crime community. So I think we need to do a little bit better. Speaking in terms of analysis and what we hopefully learned today, I hope you found it interesting, and I do hope you find me credible. But when we're looking at situations like this, let's look for body positioning and alignment. Let's look for the V and think about the 2 hoses. Let's look at the hands and look at the mechanics and watch for signs of squeeze. And why are we doing all these things? Well, if those things are in place, then I do think a choke is closer to being effective and potentially, dangerous. But if hands are separated, bodies are way out of alignment. If you see the side of a face or a chin, getting pushed on, it might be painful, but it's not necessarily deadly. So again, I want us to be more educated observers, and we can look for other relevant factors as well, like people holding the hands down, so it doesn't allow you to observe that instinct to pull down. Maybe that would have been useful information to us. Maybe Neely would have done that if he could have. That would have told us something that, yes, the choke does look dangerous, or, whatever it is. So look for those other relevant factors. Here are my final thoughts. I think there's a danger in being so certain when you don't have experience combined with knowledge, hours on the mat, hours of analysis, feeling it yourself from both sides. I think there's a danger in that. Also, judging in hindsight, these situations are scary. You have to jump on someone that you think could be a danger to people around you. And, you grab onto whatever you can and you hold on for dear life, and you're scared to let go, or you could be. And I think, this judgment in hindsight thing should be done really, really carefully, because a lot of context can be lost. You can just look at it from the comfort of your own home. You don't have to experience all the other sights, sounds, feelings, sensations, danger, fear, all of that stuff. You don't have to experience any of it. You can just kind of sit back with your arms crossed and judge. And I think we should do that really, really carefully. We should think about interventions for sure, but also the potential consequences of those interventions. This is the kind of thing that can happen. Someone could get hurt. Someone could get killed, even if they were causing trouble. That's a terrible thing. And you could be hurt by being the person who intervenes. There's just so much to calculate. So it's probably something you want to think on before the moment happens. And I want to give you one tip, and that is to learn the seatbelt grip. Learn the seatbelt grip. Let me go back to a slide that shows that. There is an option other than the choking position, and it's this one right here. What this guy's doing is he's got one arm over a shoulder and one arm under a shoulder. He's got his hands clasped, or he's grabbing a wrist. Okay, and you just pull your elbows in tight. Don't use your muscles, not your arm muscles, use your back muscles and pull in tight. Secure your upper body. Get your hooks in and secure the lower body. That position controls somebody but does not choke them. Now, I will say you got to watch out for biting and things like that, and it gives their head a lot more movement. Okay, but if we want to consider intervening and we want to avoid positions that could be potentially dangerous and deadly, the seatbelt position is one to consider. If you're going to sit and think on your capability or willingness to intervene, I want you to train Jiu Jitsu, and I want you to think about taking the back and securing the seatbelt position. That would be like a PSA I want to get out today. I hope you got some value. If you stuck with me till the end, go ahead and like the video, subscribe. Do consider some of the things that I said when the next incident shows up on YouTube. Hopefully you're going to observe it with more knowledgeable eyes. Look out for each other out there, and I will see you in the next video.